State Legislator Dialogue. This series is jointly hosted by the Aspen Institute Germany, which is based in Berlin, and the American Council on Germany, which is based in New York. And my colleagues and I at the ACG could not be more pleased to collaborate with Aspen Germany once again. Although all eyes are on Ukraine, I want to thank you all for joining us for today's conversation about immigration and integration with state representatives from the United States and Germany. As we planned this event, we could not have anticipated the current state of affairs, but we've already seen a steady stream of refugees in Europe as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, so today's topic remains incredibly relevant. The State to State series builds on initiatives that both of our organizations have undertaken in recent years, and we've recognized the incredibly important role that subnational actors play in addressing global issues. At both the ACG and at Aspen Germany, we believe that it is critical to engage decision makers and opinion leaders at the state and local level to discuss global topics. And so today, we're going to talk about immigration and integration. I'm now pleased to introduce our speakers. Their bios will be posted in the chat so you can read up on all of them. In Germany, we're joined by Kerstin Selina and Jan Markus Rossa. Kerstin Selina is a member of the Green Party and has served in the Parliament of the State of Bavaria since 2013. She is her parliamentary group's spokesperson on social policy, inclusivity, and mental health. And so, Kerstin, herzlich willkommen.
Herzlich willkommen, ich freue mich.
We are delighted to have you. And then from the north of Germany, we're joined by Markus Rossa. He is a member of the Free Democratic Party and has served in Schleswig-Holstein's state parliament since 2017. He is his party's spokesperson for justice, migration, religion, and media policy. Markus, also, herzlich willkommen to you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm happy to be here.
And on the US side, I'm pleased to welcome John McAllister. He was elected as a state senator in Nebraska in 2014 and is currently serving his second term. He's the co-chair of the Task Force on Immigration and the States at the National Conference of State Legislators. John, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
So before we dive in, I have just one housekeeping point, and that is to remind our viewers to make sure that your mics are off so that there's no background noise. And it would be great if you would keep your video on so that we can make this more interactive. With that, I'm delighted to turn things over to my friend and colleague, Stormy Miltner, the director of the Aspen Institute Germany. She will moderate today's discussion. And with that, Stormy, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Steve. It always pains me when you have to say the virtual floor. It would be so much nicer to do this in person, but it would also be much more difficult to get everybody together across the Atlantic. So I think there's at least some good coming out of the pandemic, that we now have a tool to meet more easily across the Atlantic and discuss important issues together. It is a joy to see many of Aspen friends, but also many new faces from both sides of the Atlantic. And as Steve has said, this is an important discussion series for us, because we see the states as labs of democracy, as ground where new legislation can be tried out, where learnings can take place, where mistakes sometimes happen, but also very many good cases. And we want to learn from each other and initiate this learning from each other. And this is also what this meeting is all about today. We want to learn from our panelists, but we also want to learn from our participants who have a lot to say as well. And so Steve is absolutely right. Keep your videos or your cameras on, and get ready to be engaged throughout the meeting. This is too much of this topic is way too important to just let it run while you're doing other things on the side. This is a good opportunity to really engage. As Steve also said, our minds are currently very, very much on the Russia-Ukraine conflict and on all those people who are currently fleeing from the aggression. And when we planned our meeting, we had a moment when we thought, oh, should we actually do it? And then we said, yes, we should definitely do it, because Europe, Germany is going to face one of the biggest refugee crises we have faced for a long, long time. And we have to talk about how we are going to handle this and to deal with this. And I know that Kerstin, Bavaria is preparing for the arrival of refugees from the Ukraine. And a lot of preparation has to take place. And it is a logistical challenge for cities and communities. You have already learned a lot from the last refugee crisis of 2015. So Kerstin, could you give us an overview what you and the state are currently doing, and also on the learnings from the 2015 refugee crisis?
Well, I think the preparation is going really smoothly and easily. We learned a lot during the last crisis, where a lot of people came to our country in a short time. And we are used to having a lot of people coming from other countries. Like we had people from Russian and Eastern European countries for many years, 4.5 million who live in Germany now. We had people from Syria, Afghanistan coming within a short time. And now we do know that we have to expect people from the Ukraine. And what we do is we make preparations. We know exactly where we want to have, where we can have them for the first nights, like in places which we had for other refugees. We do have lists already from people who say, well, I can offer a room in my house, I can offer parts of my house. We do have a very good work with organizations like Red Cross and technical help, and so everybody knows what to do, and I think this is running really smoothly and easily. What I think will be a problem is how to help the people who do not have a passport from the Ukraine, but who are willing to flee or to leave the country as well, like students from African countries who study there, or like people from international organizations who live there and work there, but do not have an Ukrainian pass and do not have a passport from the European Union. We also have people just working there who are mobile workers and can live everywhere in the States, or people who are there just by chance right now. And so the people who do not have a passport from a European country or from the Ukraine, this is a problem I think we haven't solved yet, but we are in process of solving it.
So how should we imagine the situation? So there are many people coming in, and they are first of all channeled to centers where they get also psychological help, or how? Maybe you can tell us a little bit from the ground.
No. We do have the different levels of the state government, from the very top in Berlin to the places like Würzburg, my hometown. So everybody knows we do have to do this, we do have to do this. And the most important thing is to know where do we which place do we offer them to sleep for the first nights, for the first weeks. So this is at the low level of the city governments, and this is easy. And the city governments already have the lists of people who say, well, we take somebody into our house, and either we know this language or we do not know this language. We have relatives there. We offer to our own relatives to stay there. So the local level is full in progress, the work. So this is the most important thing. And of course, we do know how many people arrive, because they do not fly here within a second, but they have to get here with trains. So we can tell the trains, you go to Bavaria, you go to Hamburg, you go to Berlin. So this is not very difficult. And we do have organizations like Red Cross and other organizations who are really good in building up tents, building up beds, who do have a lot of stuff which they just bring into the progress, into solving the problem. And we do have a European Union which is really united right now and works together.
Which has not always been the case on migration issues.
Yes. Yes.
Also, our eastern neighbors were more critical towards migration, right?
Yeah.
So let me ask a follow-up question before I come to John and Markus. So looking into the medium and longer term, what has to happen to ensure that that we will actually be able to include those people who have come to us into our societies?
I don't think that they want to stay here. They do leave a beautiful country, great buildings, great towns, good education. If there is something they can go back to, they will. So what we need is help for a time which we do not know how long. So, but this is, it's I think we can compare it with the situation in Southeastern Europe, in Bosnia. We had a lot of people fleeing from Bosnia in the 90s. Their kids went to school here for a year, maybe for 2, and then the parents went back to them after peace was installed. And so when you go into that area, you have a lot of now grown-up kids who speak German fluently, which is easy for business, which is easy for being a tourist. So I think it will be kind of the same, because the people would not want to stay here if they can go back to their country. I mean, they want to defend their country. So why should we expect them to stay here for 20 years? Maybe for 1 year, maybe for 2 years, maybe for less. But this is something we can't really say right now, because nobody knows what Putin is going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the big uncertainty of what is going to happen next, and if it really will be possible to go back in the in most likely not in the short term, but in the medium term. I think it's something we hope, everybody hopes for, but we just don't know. I would now like to turn to John. And John, when I took a look on your website, I found the following quote, which I would like to cite. And it's,
Go ahead.
Immigration is good for the economy and good for our country. Anti-immigrant sentiment is toxic and fundamentally un-American. I think this is very, very, very spot on. Could you tell us a little bit more about your position and what the conservative case for immigration means?
Well, that's fairly easy to do. You know, Nebraska is in the center of the country, the Midwest, they call it. It's a state of 2 million people, and immigration has been essential in Nebraska. We have a very low unemployment rate, 1.8%, and we are desperate for workers. And over the last 3 or 4 years, Afghan refugees have come into Nebraska, and we have the same kinds of social organization that I think that I saw in Germany when I was there 4 years ago. And Germany does such an incredible job of integrating refugees into their society. I was so impressed with that. But with low unemployment, yes, we're desperate for workers, mainly for our food processing plants. So we do need workers, and you can look at the statistics on immigration, and for sure, yes, the school systems are forced to pay for that education, but that second generation of immigrants that come into the country are really motivated, and they do a great job and really expand the economy. So immigration is important to all states in this country, particularly in Nebraska.
When you're saying by German immigration policies and our way to integrate people, what actually does impress you, what we are doing right, and tell us a little bit also about what your state is doing.
Yeah, well, when I came to Germany, it was an exchange program where we looked at the energy infrastructure in Germany. But one of the sessions that we talked about how Germans bring in refugees, find housing for those people, and then German language classes to make them integrate into society. And I thought that was so well done. And I was very interested in the story about those people that come to Germany and then go back to their home countries, and what a win-win situation for Germany and some of those other countries. I'm pretty impressed with the way that Germany handles that.
And is your state pursuing similar policies?
Say again?
Is your state pursuing similar policies?
We don't do that well. I think some of the local organizations, Lutheran Family Services and the Catholics, faith-based groups, seem to do a better job finding refugees homes, getting people involved with the school system. And the schools have done a nice job in terms of help with the language issues. So not as well organized as I think I saw in Germany.
That's really interesting, and I would love to come back to that in a second. But first, I would also like to hear from Marcus. And yes, I checked with Marcus. He is called Marcus and not Jan Marcus.
Yes, that's correct.
And we just heard from John that migration, I mean, has a is very important also from an economic point of view, and maybe even more so with our demographic changes we are seeing, but also what we experienced, the shortage in workers as a consequence of the pandemic, also travel, migration restrictions, and so on. Tell us a little bit about your state and also the importance of migration for business and the economy and your constituencies.
Yeah. We have a very long tradition in Germany, so to say, with our guest workers or foreign workers, because the development of Germany in the 50s was based on guest workers in Germany who came from Turkey, Italy, Greece, Spain, and Portugal. And they were very, very important for the success of German economy, and we shouldn't forget that. But we made big mistakes, we know today, because we did not integrate these people who still live here in the third generation already, and we still have problems with the integration process to some extent. And we have to learn how to find solutions so that the integration process will be better. And I think in Schleswig-Holstein, especially, and other states in Germany, we started with the legislation due to integration and participation, which is very important for us. And of course, we do have a demographic problem in Germany. We do need skilled workers. We need high potential from all over the world to be successful in the future. And we have to present us with a warm welcome to workers all over the world. And there is a lot of work to do, we have to do, because we do not differentiate enough between refugees and asylum on the one hand side and immigration for work reasons on the other hand. There must be a differentiation because the conditions precedent are totally different. We have to give protection and help and shelter to the refugees. There is no question. And we have to integrate them. And maybe we will find new workers for our country, for our economy, and for our businesses here. My colleague Kerstin mentioned the refugees from Croatia. There are still people who came from Croatia to our country, who are well integrated, who are very important for our business and for our economy. One example is Salihamidzic from FC Bayern München, for example. He's one of the managers there, and he is a German already, and he was well integrated. And this shows how important it is not to separate, but to integrate in Germany. And this is very important for our economy, not on the high level, on the high potential level, but also on the skilled workers level, so to say.
Thank you so much. I was just alerted that we sometimes have a little bit of a feedback. So maybe we need to, if we are not speaking, turn off our mics. Maybe then it is a little bit better. I hope so, at least. If not, just let me know. Kerstin, you were nodding, and Steve, I saw your hand, and you don't have to, we are co-moderating, just jump in. But first, I saw Kerstin nodding when Markus said that we did quite a few mistakes in the beginning with regard to our integration policies. Why did you nod?
The problem was that at that time we expected that men come to work and go back after a couple of years, but they did not. And maybe they themselves did expect that they would go back after a couple of years, but what happened is that they brought their families, that they got kids, that they married, that they built a house, things like that. But the problem was, since we expected them at that time to go back home soon, German politics was acting like there is no integration needed. So you did not really take care for having them really integrated in the school system. The school system in Germany separates fairly early, and if you want your kid to be educated well enough to be a doctor or a lawyer, you have to give it in a certain kind of school. If you don't know the school system because nobody tells you, because everybody thinks you will leave the country a couple of years from now anyway, your kid will not have success. And that was really bad integration at that time. We also did not take care for women coming with their husbands and educating the kids, getting to know German. We didn't have language classes for them. We expected the men at their work to learn enough German to do their work. More wasn't needed and wasn't wanted. And the women did not learn German. So what we do have now is a class of elderly people who still do not know German very well. People who arrived here and being 40 or older did never really get into German language. And this is a big problem because, for example, Russian people coming from Russia or Russian-speaking countries later, we also do have a part of them who still does not speak German very well. Most of them do, but not all of them. But what they do is they listen to Russia Today all day because they understand Russian, and it's a Russian-speaking political media. So that is something which we realize right now, that a class of people or a group of people does have totally different information, because they do not know how to read German newspapers to have information of all parts. So these mistakes we had made, we should not make them again. And I think by now we are smarter.
Steve.
So thank you. I mean, this is a fascinating discussion, and Kerstin started to talk about this, but in the chat, John wrote, "Let's talk about demographic issues and falling birth rates in both countries." I'd like to give John a chance to sort of weigh in and make his point himself, but Kerstin, you were talking about these demographic shifts in the same way that you were talking about the importance of language in order to assimilate people. But we've got two different trends that are sort of going on that one needs to take into consideration. I have a separate question which I'd like to come back to, but I think it makes sense to kind of unpack this demographic piece a little bit further. So John, let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. Yes, I call it the demographic imperative, because with falling birth rates in both countries, and we are below replacement, and so immigration is so essential to maintain the population of both countries. And in fact, Nebraska would have lost population in the last census, which is just a year ago, if it hadn't been for immigration. So you can see it's not only an economic issue, but if we want to maintain populations, we have to encourage immigration. You know, in the United States, we brought in about 1 million people, and I think in Germany in 2019 is about 1.3 million. But still, I think populations in both countries are falling, and so we need to perhaps embrace subjects like childcare, help with housing, those kinds of issues that encourage immigrants to stay in this country. It's a pressing issue in our country. And of course, we really haven't done a good job with immigration reform. And that's that's the fault of Congress, and it's probably the toxic environment that we have in our government. I'm happy to hear that Germany doesn't have those same kinds of issues.
So, Kerstin, it looks like you're chomping at the bit to say something, and then we can go to Marcus.
John, the thing is, you have a big advantage. In your country, you speak English. German is much harder to learn. And even Marcus has a big advantage, because in his part of Germany, they at least speak German. If you learn German at school, you can understand Marcus. But if you go to southern Bavaria, you feel like it's a totally different language. And this is, I think, really a big problem for us to get qualified immigration, because German is such a difficult language. And even if you know German, there are so many areas in German where you don't understand a thing. And at least as long as Great Britain was in the European Union as a country like we basically fought for qualified immigrants, for having elderly care, or running trucks or things like that. An English-speaking country has an advantage to attract those immigrants. And within Germany, Marcus has an advantage compared to Bavaria.
But you should visit our islands in the North Sea. For example, it is even for me hard to understand the people there when they are talking to each other in their dialect. But that is definitely a problem in Germany. And what we did not do, and this is, I think, another difference to the US, we never represented ourselves as an immigration country. And this has to change. And I think this takes some time to show that the German society is open for foreign nationals. We do have a lot of problems. And I want to remind you that we discussed, for example, that colored people, for example, from the US, were warned to visit eastern parts of Germany some years ago. And this is a problem. You cannot discriminate foreigners and foreign people, and on the one hand side, and on the other hand, you are telling them that you are open to welcome everybody in your country. This is a contradiction, and we have to solve this problem. So integration and participation is not only a duty or an objective for those who are coming to Germany, but for the Germans as well. We have to be willing, we have to have the will to integrate people into our society, and this is where a lot of work has to be done in the next years when we want to solve the immigration problem in Germany. And I think this is a big difference to the US.
But Marcus, that actually provides a perfect segue to the question that I wanted to pose to all three of you. You know, your comments about how in Germany there was never a presentation of the country as an immigration country. And in your opening comments, each of you talked about the advantages of immigration and assimilation and integration. And I wanted to ask, in each of your states, to what degree xenophobia is still a problem, and how one can make the case locally that having a more diverse community can be enriching. Each of your states has very rural areas, but also some major cities. And so one of the questions I have for you is whether you see differences between those urban and rural areas. But again, sort of how does one make the case to local communities in cities, in more rural areas, that having diversity, having a diverse community can be a benefit? I don't know who wants to start. Marcus, your microphone is on, so why don't we go?
Thank you. Yes, for me, it was a big surprise in 2015 and the following years that the refugees from Syria and other parts of the world, Afghanistan, were pretty well integrated into the societies of smaller villages and smaller towns in Schleswig-Holstein. Mm-hmm. And they were better integrated in these smaller towns and villages than they were integrated in the bigger cities, or in Hamburg, which is not part of our state, but in the neighborhood. And one reason was that in smaller societies, it is much easier to learn about each other, to become friends, and to cooperate in the daily life. And that was a surprise for me, because I thought the more rural an area is, the more skeptic the people are in these villages, but it wasn't. There was another problem, that the refugees didn't like to stay in the rural areas of Schleswig-Holstein because it was boring. They couldn't meet people from their home country, for example. They couldn't find work later on. So they moved from the small villages to the big cities, and they had to face totally different problems in the big cities, because there were ghettos. They were put together in certain areas of the cities. For example, in Hamburg, we had that problem. And they were not integrated into the German society. And that, I think, for me, this is one reason why we started the project Integration and Participation Law in Schleswig-Holstein. I'm glad that we fulfilled what we intended to do at the end of the legislation period, but we have to go on, and we have to bring that into practice, what we regulated in our laws.
Thank you. And Kerstin, perhaps you next, and then John.
I can continue. We had this problem that, we have this experience that people get integrated easy in small towns, basically all over the development of integration. We had it with Italian immigrants, as well as with people from Russia, as well as we had it with people from Syria and Afghanistan. In small towns, they get to know the German language and other Germans easily, and they recognize each other easily. So, but still, many of them come from big towns and want to be in big towns because they're used to town life. So I can understand that, but that leads to the problems Marcus said. But I also wanted to say that it's not really a rural and town problem of getting integrated, but being racist seems to be more dominant in areas where hardly any foreigners live, which is weird. But something you don't know, you are afraid of. Not that something you know and have bad experience, but something you don't know you are afraid of. We realized that in many areas in Germany, no matter whether it was a town or whether it was a small place, the less immigrants there were, the more racism there was. Towns like Munich, for example, in Bavaria, who have international workers all over, and they know that diversity is working. The other thing we have is right now we do try to get a lot of immigrants, especially for elderly care. But if you have somebody from the Philippines, from Vietnam, from wherever, from a southeastern country, they also tend to move into the big cities, where we do not need as many workers in that field as in the rural areas. But if you come to a small town in Bavaria, your German is not very good, but then you don't understand a thing, and you don't even have a place where you get to buy food which you want to have for cooking your own food, then you rather move into a big town where you also have a community with people from the same area, who speak the same language. And this is human, this is natural. When I was in the United States, I really loved being together with the Americans, but every now and then when I met a German, I said, oh yeah, it's nice. I don't have to explain myself. He just knows how I got educated, what books I read, what music we hear, things like that. And this is, I think, a problem we have to face in all societies who do want to make immigration. How do we get people integrated without having people from their own kind close around?
Thank you for that. I think that's a good context to provide. And so let's come to this side of the Atlantic. John, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the challenge of xenophobia, but also how to make the case in local communities for more diverse communities.
Well, Nebraska offers an interesting contrast to what I'm hearing from Germany. We have many beef processing plants throughout the state. And the thing about those plants is they hire a lot of people. And in some towns like Lexington or Fremont, Nebraska, the need for workers was so intense that they were recruiting folks, Mexico, Central America, to come up and work. And those communities were transformed when those plants opened up. And yes, there were some initial issues about integration, but for the most part, those communities have embraced those workers that came into the state. The school systems have adapted, and they would have dual language education, so those kids could start to learn English. When I first ran for office in 2014, some of the xenophobia was going on to such an extent. And of course, Donald Trump, with some of his fiery language, made it actually worse. But I think over the last 8 years, some of the language is less toxic. And I think people do recognize that immigration is absolutely essential if this country is going to prosper. So I think they're getting the message. And some towns in Nebraska, particularly Omaha, there's now a Hispanic area that was once pretty dead, but they have transformed that area of Omaha into a vibrant community. So I think sometimes you just need to embrace those cultures that people bring into the country, because America is truly a melting pot. So you embrace those cultures and enjoy it.
Thank you so much. I think it was John, you started out in one of your first comments to really say that there is also a business case for immigration, that we do need immigration and that it really, really makes sense. So there is certainly also from a business point of view, from a company point of view, also a case for immigration and for integrating immigrants. And I can remember before I joined Aspen, I was with the Federation of German Industries. And I remember the last refugee crisis where we talked a lot with the DEHK, the Chamber of Commerce, as well as the BDR, but also the unions, of what needs to be done to ensure that people who are staying and who want to stay are eventually also integrated into the labor market. And I'm not so sure how well that really worked. And I wanted to ask first Kerstin and then also Marcus, what we learned from business and government cooperation in the last refugee crisis. What were good cases, what were maybe not so good cases, and what we can do better? Kerstin.
I start with what did not work very well. We had a lot of refugees from Afghanistan, Syria, who really tried hard to integrate, who tried hard to get school done well, who tried hard to get a job, things like that. And they had to go back to the country where they had the passport from, which was not necessarily the country where they came from, because they might have lived in Lebanon for many years now, fleeing from their own country to Lebanon, but still having a passport from Syria. And they had to go to the country in the European Union where they first set foot within the European Union. Which, I mean, if you are integrated in Germany and you have to go to Poland, doesn't really make sense, because the language isn't much easier than German after you have tried to learn German for 3 years. So what did not work with the last government at all was that people coming as refugees but wanting to try to stay here as a part of the labor force could not change the way of coming in after being here. So what the government expected from them is go back, try to get a visa for being a workforce here, which is totally insane. Let me really say it as clear as that, because it doesn't make sense to send people back to get a different kind of visa. Doesn't make sense. So, and also what we learned, I think now, especially for Ukrainians to come, is that people having in an uncertain state of are you allowed to stay here or not, and for how long are you allowed to stay here? This does not make sense at all, especially if you do not let them work. People here with a very difficult situation in their own country do not know for years whether they might stay here or not, which also reduces the efforts of German government to teach them language, to help them through school, to help them to get a job. But Germany says, well, if they have to go back soon anyway, and if they are only here because right now there is war in their country, we do not allow them to work. This does not make sense at all. And I think this is when the Ukrainians come, everybody knows they are allowed to work if they want to as soon as possible. I think many of them do not have the chance to work because young women come with small children. They are in their mind totally upset because they do not know what happens to Ukraine. They will not go to work the next week. So they hope to stay here for a couple of weeks or a couple of months to go back. But if they want to stay here, they are allowed to work at once. And this is something we learned. And the one thing we still have to learn, where some countries are better than Bavaria, I think, Marcus, yours, for example, is accepting the letters of reference, the school classes, graduation papers, whatever, to find out what do they know and what do they still have to learn for being prepared to work here. In Germany, quite often we say we do not really know what you learned at your university, so we can't really judge. So you better have to start all over again, which they do not do, and which doesn't make sense. This is something where we have to get better, and some parliaments from states are better than others. I think Bavaria is fairly restrict. Other countries are better with that. Maybe Marcus can say that, but this is really important that if somebody worked in a field and knows his way around there or her way around there, they have to be able to work in that field as soon as possible, and they do not have to start over with education in that field all over again.
Marcus, we also want to hear from you, but I wanted to remind our audience that this is also the time when you should raise your electronic hand. I do have one person already who wants to speak, but everybody else, please come in. And Marcus, I would like to add a half question to what Kerstin just said on our dual education system. If that is well enough prepared or let's say it differently, is it integrative enough and to attract and to integrate immigrants into the labor market?
Our school system, did I get that correct?
Our dual education system.
Okay. This is a really big problem, what was described by Kerstin. We have a very specific system of education, and it is really hard to compare that with the education of foreign countries. And we have to become better in finding solutions how to accept foreign education and make it or treat it equivalent to the education in Germany. I know that, for example, the chambers in Germany, business chamber or Handwerkskammer, that these chambers have ideas how to investigate and how to test the knowledge of foreign nationals and to make a comparison of their knowledge with the knowledge a German citizen will have with a dual education. And that is, I think, very, very important for the integration. Another very important issue is what Kerstin said. When you are coming to Germany as a refugee, you cannot be an immigrant for a worker's immigrant. And it is correct that you have to leave Germany before you can come back to immigrate for workers' reasons. And this is irrational, totally. There is no good reason for that. We have well integrated people here in Germany who had to leave Germany and who came back later on as an immigrant and not as a refugee. And there is no logic in this system at all. And we started in Schleswig-Holstein an initiative to the federal, the Bundesrat, to bring in a proposal to change the system right at the beginning, because it is irrelevant whether you come to Germany as an immigrant or as a refugee. If you are well integrated, if you have a job here, if you can work here, if you can bring a benefit for our society. So we shouldn't differentiate between refugees and immigrants. I think that is very important. Another thing, what we learned in 2015 is that bureaucracy in Germany is a horror for immigrants. There are so many laws and legislation and so on. It was almost impossible for those who try to help refugees to integrate them into our system, into our society, that it was almost impossible to figure out for an amateur what are the conditions precedent to get an allowance to work in Germany, for example. And this has to be changed very, very fast. And we try to figure out what kind of legislation is in place already. And our State Department of Economy in Schleswig-Holstein provided us with more than 350 different legislational acts that are relevant for the economic and labor integration of foreign nationals. And that is sorry, not reasonable for a modern state at all, and that is to be changed.
I'd like to mention that bureaucracy isn't unique to Germany, and we have issues like that as well in our country. We're talking about the educational system in terms of language, and I think Nebraska does a fairly good job. We have dual language education classes in our K-12 systems, and they'll teach a child in one language, and then they'll go in the afternoon perhaps teach that class in English. And so over a fairly short amount of time, those kids in the system speak a beautiful English, and oftentimes they interpret for their parents who've had more difficulty gaining their English, much more so than their kids. And even in Nebraska, you'll see dual language. People will speak Spanish and English, and in all the restaurants, they'll take your order either in Spanish or English. And that's a fairly common occurrence, at least in Nebraska, and I think often in the rest of the country. That first generation has a hard time picking up the language, but the kids pick it up almost immediately.
And with this, I would like to open it up for our participants. And the first one on my list is Rob.
Thanks, Stormy. Kind of a participant, but also helped organize everything. I guess I had one comment on the education, just to build on what Senator McAllister said about the dual language. The school system where my son went to school here in New York State, actually all of the administrative information that was sent out to parents was also bilingual, which was a critical step in integration so that the parents actually could be more engaged in the education process of their kids, which I thought was, I think something that's growing. But my main question was touching on a lot of what all of you said, sort of the challenges or the limitations that are posed by federal policy on immigration, whether it's immigration reform or a lot of the bureaucracy that might be in place around work permits, et cetera. How much, sort of a twofold question, how much flexibility or experimentation do you all have at the state level to try and get around some of those limitations? And related to that, Senator McAllister, as we noted earlier, you're part of this task force with the National Conference of State Legislators. I'm curious how you all work together, both as US states or perhaps Deutsche Länder, to push for changes at the federal level to make your lives and your work on these issues easier. So maybe start with the American side, we can go over to the German side.
Well, thank you for that, Rob, and I quite agree. The American immigration policy is clearly broken, but I'm starting to see green shoots that would perhaps indicate that we're more willing to pick up that policy, the H-2A policy for guest workers. That we're in desperate need for guest workers, and I would bet Germany has similar issues as well. So what we will do when I'm in Washington in 2 weeks, I'm sure we'll write up a declaration that we'll present to Congress, and perhaps we can slowly but surely move the immigration issue in front of the public. I think there's more willingness now to look at those immigration policies and perhaps finally get it settled, because it does need to be settled.
Markus?
Yes. We have similar problems in Germany. We have to differentiate here between refugees on one hand side and immigrants on the other hand. What we do need is a modern immigration law with fair and clear conditions that have to be met when you want to immigrate to Germany. And we do not have that clear and fair conditioned law in Germany right now. And I think this is one big problem that has to be solved. And what we have to do is that integration, for me and for my party, should end with the citizenship. that should be the goal of our country. That is the goal of the US. You want all your immigrants to be American, I guess. And this is what we should learn and what we should integrate into our laws, that the final goal should be the citizenship of any immigrant who's coming to Germany, who wants to live with his family and his kids and grandchilds in Germany, grandchildren in Germany, that they become citizens of Germany. And that is not clearly stated in our laws at the moment, that this is the final goal we should try to achieve. And my hope is that after the last election and a new government in Germany, that this will be changed. It is part of the coalition agreement to find a so-called Zuwanderungsgesetz, which is not an Einwanderungsgesetz. There is a difference between Zuwanderung and Einwanderung, and both seems to be immigration in English. But Einwanderung means that there is the citizenship at the end of the process. And on the other hand, we have really severe problems with the government, the federal government, with regard to our intention to protect and to safeguard refugees in Europe, for example, Greece, where the conditions for refugees were terrible and where it was impossible for the states, the Bundesländer in Germany, to grant support and help for these refugees, because we needed the consent with a Minister of Inner Affairs of the federal government. And very often we ask for this consent and we didn't get it. And this is really a problem, because it is in contradiction to our political goals and targets we have, and we try to realize in the past. And this, I don't know how to change that, but there is another initiative on its way, so let's try and hope.
I just want to add one more thing. It was totally fine what Marcus said, just one more thing. We also need to have space for people who cannot work or who cannot become a part of the workforce. Like, for example, people who do have disabilities and got carried here by their relatives, or people who had so many really bad experiences on their way to Europe, that their mind is just full with memories and they cannot work and learn German within 6 months. Like somebody who is healthy, young, and just came with a plane here without any problems. So we have to find also spaces and places to help those people get integrated into Germany in a longer time distance, because I think not everybody can fulfill the same time schedule by integration. And at the end, we want to have citizens, as my colleague Marcus said.
I'd like to respond to Marcus. In America, we don't distinguish between refugees and immigrants. Anybody that comes to this country generally wants to stay. And so, you know, the big issue for us is we've got 10 to 12 million undocumented people in the country. And the issue, the political issue that we have is, how do you deal with that? Do you give those people citizenship? And of course, those people in some parts of the political society say, well, no, you're giving those people amnesty. They didn't earn citizenship. So that's part of the problem, the political problem we're dealing in this country. And also given the fact we still have a big flow of people coming in from the South, maybe as many as 200,000 a month. And that's the political issue that we have in our country, is how to deal with that as well.
Thank you very, very much for these elaborations. We do have 2 more questions, and I first hand over to Laura Senfleben and then to Moritz Ludwig. Laura Senfleben from the US Embassy.
Thanks, Stormy. Hi, everyone. Thanks for this great discussion. I love this format and I love tuning in. I'm Laura. I work with the US Embassy here in Berlin. I work with young leaders. And one topic that we keep working on is countering violent extremism. And my question follows up on Stephen's question with regards to xenophobia, maybe even, you know, violent extremisms in your states, opposition to immigration. How does your state deal with that problem? Is that even a problem that we can tackle on the state level, or is that something, you know, that we should work with in maybe schools or citizen dialogues? Or yeah. So my question is, how does your state deal with that topic? I hope that makes sense.
Kerstin, would you like to start maybe?
Yeah, I think every state and every town deals a little bit differently with it. Like those formats where people talk to each other. Some try to have those formats. Some think we don't need that. I think there's a clear legal way to deal with racism. I mean, but this is not the solution for everything. This is just how to handle things which have happened. What we do need is to organize our society in that way that things do not just happen, so that racism doesn't happen. And this is a big part of it is education, and a big part of it is getting to know. I remember this one story of this older German couple sitting at his balcony and seeing that this family with many kids from Romania moved into their house, and they were just, well, you know, what kind of people are coming there, and do we really want to have that? We want to have our life as we had it before. Does it change or not? And then they realized that there was a lot of water dripping on their balcony a couple of days later, and they got really upset and went upstairs. And then they found out that the family doesn't have a dryer, so they had to have their laundry totally wet, and they didn't have a laundry machine and not a dryer, so they had their laundry totally wet out on the balcony. So now they understood why this happened and could deal with it and could try to help them. And so this getting to know each other in small communities, meaning in small numbers of people, is really, really important. But whether this happens at your soccer club or at school or at work or somebody or somewhere else doesn't really matter. So legal procedures are not the solution. They're important, but we need to start much earlier to reduce racism.
John, would you also like to come in? Maybe you didn't hear me. John, would you also like to come in?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I missed that. No, it's a local issue in Nebraska as well. Local police forces deal with some of the racist incidents that have occurred. Although I think we depend on the national government for some of those national groups, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, those kinds of folks. We depend on the national government to deal with those extremist groups. You know, white nationalism is becoming a problem throughout our country, and I think the Biden administration understands they're a primary threat. So I'm glad that they recognized it and are dealing with it as well as they have.
And Marcus?
Yeah, I although I'm a lawyer, I do agree that law is not the solution for that problem. And I think we have to differentiate between those extremist groups. We have them in Germany, for example, even a party who is member of the parliament, the AfD, and this party is in a way very racist. And it was elected by almost 6 to 7% in Schleswig-Holstein. And I think what we really have to do is racism, or to prevent or to work against racism on a low-level day-to-day basis. This is a problem. If we start to be more open-minded, everybody of us, we will encourage other people who are skeptic as well, and they might be more open for foreign nationals in our communities and our society. And law or police or whoever comes from the state side is not able to solve this problem in a way that we really overcome racism in our on a day-to-day basis, and that is a big problem. We have to find ways how to bring this issue into our schools. What we learn is in the kindergarten, for example, the kids do not differentiate whether their playmate is colored or German or Chinese or whatever. They are only kids for each other, and I think that is the moment where we have to start integration processes with the kids, and then this will change our society, I guess. And it's so to say, it is more tolerance, more acceptance, more interested into foreign cultures, for example. This is interesting, and this is a value for our communities and society. So that is what we have to bring into the heads of the people in our country. Mm. But it's a long way, definitely. I used to live in the US, in Virginia, which is part of the South. It is very southern to some extent, and I was a German, and I enjoyed a very, very warm welcome in Virginia. And this changed my view on this problem, because I was a stranger, so-called an alien in the US, and I had to learn how to integrate myself, and I learned how difficult this could be. And I got the help of some people who took me to the shopping mall and to their sports bar and wherever. And so I started to integrate into the American society, which was very, very interesting. But that showed me that it is the day-to-day life that has to be changed. It has to change when we want to be successful with the integration of foreign nationals.
Mm. Thank you so much. I think we have time for one more question. Over to you, Moritz.
Thank you, Stormy. So I'm a student. I come from the eastern part of Germany, from Magdeburg, which is in Saxony-Anhalt. I'm studying in Dresden, and I'm volunteering as a legal counselor for refugees. And I also have a friend. She studies with me. She was glad that the pandemic happened because of online uni. She was able to move back from Dresden to Berlin because it was much more welcoming towards her. And so my question ties in with a question of Laura. What measures can be done, and would you think that the measures should come top down, so from the state level to the society, or more bottom up, so from society up towards the government? And to the Virginia question, I was also a exchange student in Virginia, and I would say Virginia is southern, but it's more international than other states, with NATO headquarters, with the proximity to Washington, DC. And I think that not only in the south of the US, but also in a lot of US states, there are also those anti-immigrant sentiments really strongly. So my question would not only be for the German state legislators, but also for you, Mr. McAllister.
Sure.
Yeah, please.
I'll respond. Yeah, racism issues are all over the U.S., but I think, the point I made earlier, it's less so than it was maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago. And the fact that, you know, Donald Trump is no longer president is good, because he would certainly inflame those racist tendencies. But, you know, I think we have to work from the top down, maybe pass some new immigration laws on a national basis, but we need to work from the bottom up. Local communities need to embrace those people coming into their communities and provide the housing and maybe the benefit levels that they first need when they arrive. So top down, bottom up, I think both approaches are necessary.
Yes, and I think it shouldn't be too sophisticated how we want to manage integration, and that is a problem. And so I prefer what John said, that it must be from the bottom when we want to be successful with integration. Everybody has to be open. We cannot make that top down. We will not be successful if the state forces its citizens to be open-minded and integrative. It has to come from the bottom, from the heart of the people, and everybody can work on that. And what we learned in 2015, so many people who have never been in touch with people from Syria or Afghanistan opened their homes for them, helped them without asking where they come from, whether it is in a different culture or not. It was totally open-minded and just the will to help. And it's the same situation now. And the very interesting thing is Poland and Hungary were two countries who refused to take refugees from Afghanistan and Syria. And now they are members of the group of countries in the EU who offered help to the Ukrainian refugees. So that was a change to some extent, and I hope that this is only the beginning.
One thing to add, if I may, is there is one thing the government really has to do, top, bottom down, is to do everything they can against hate speech. I think what we do see in the internet, in the messengers, and what is so much hate speech which affects the mind of people who get messages like that all the time. So government has to basically destroy hate speech, whatever it takes. So, and the other thing is, I think we have to admit what we feel attracted to and what we do not feel attracted to. I realized that when I was in Paris a year ago, I was at a really famous tourist place. A lot of people were sitting there, and I was wondering, where should I sit down? And I looked a little bit, there were people from all over the world, all kinds of people, and I realized that I did not care for the color that people had, or whether they wore something on their head or not. But where I did not want to sit was when somebody smoked, because I do not like smoke. I didn't care whether he was from Arabia or from Germany or from France. As soon as somebody had a cigarette in his hand, I didn't want to sit with him. But I wanted to sit, for example, with women having their mobile phone in their hand and showing them pictures of their kids. This was or young people who looked like a student and having a book in her hand. And this was when I realized that I get attracted to kinds of people, not depending on the color they have on their skin, but depending on some things which I find sympathetic or not sympathetic. And that is something I think we should be more aware of. Maybe we can teach that at schools, or just get that into society, and this will help, I think, a lot.
Thank you so very much, and also for the many ideas where we can do differently. This is what this exchange is all about, and I'm looking at the time, and it's those 75 minutes have gone by very fast, and I fear that our time is over. Steve. Now you are muted.
I thought I pressed the button, but it did not go through. Let me just say a huge thank you to Kerstin, John, and Marcos. I found this conversation really interesting. I thought it was interesting how we started and toward the close talked about the refugee crisis as a result of the war in Ukraine, but that really the content of the discussion was much broader about the past, the present, and the future of immigration policy in both of our countries. It's clear that there is a lot of room for improvement when it comes to assimilation in terms of language, in terms of education, but also in terms of how to fight racism and xenophobia in both countries, but also that a lot of progress has been made in some ways. And so I think we all sort of take away from this conversation some homework that we have, some very important homework that we have, but also some positive progress that we've made. So I just want to thank all three of you again for taking the time to talk with us today. And Stormy, from the ACG to the Aspen Institute, we really love the partnership with you and your team. And I think I speak for all of my colleagues. It is always great to collaborate with the Aspen Institute Germany, with you, with your staff, with your colleagues. And so thank you again for a great discussion.